Welcome to Robbins Live, brought to you today by Langford Allergy. I'm April Bragg, President and CEO of the Robbins Regional Chamber, and we are streaming live to Facebook and YouTube. Our guest today is Jeff Thompson, a partner with Constangy, Brooks, Smith, and Prophete LLC. And today's topic covers legal considerations for businesses in a post-COVID-19 environment. Jeff, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm blessed to be here.
Well, I think I have seen your name and or Constangy Brooks in my inbox most days over the last 8 to 10 weeks. What has this time been like for you and your business there?
Well, as you can imagine, it's been pretty hectic. We're labor and employment lawyers and represent corporations and hospitals and a lot of healthcare and other businesses. And so they had a lot of questions that got hit all at once. It was like drinking out of a fire hose.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And, as someone whose job it is to help businesses prepare for and anticipate things that they don't know are coming, what would you say has been the most frequently asked question of you and your team through all of this?
Well, one of them was, when can we reopen? That was one of the questions. But a lot of the questions that were asked were related to various things like, can we take temperatures and other things like that? And if our employees are hesitant to come in, what do we do? So there's a lot of questions out there that we've been answering lately.
Very good. So as businesses reopen, of course, within the state guidelines, what do you have in terms of, or what advice do you have in terms of having a policy for office operations post-COVID?
Well, what I've told people is this. First of all, don't open too quickly. Open when you're ready and when you can operationally get started. Some were opening quickly, others never closed. But what I have told people all along is prepare a plan for reopening, do it in phases instead of all at once. Make sure that you have a written plan in place, make sure that you have your management team trained, and then properly communicate to employees what the expectations are, as well as what the needs are with regard to keeping them safe, because there's a lot of fear out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned fear, so let's just take that and tackle it right here at the onset. What should employers do if they have employees who don't want to report back to work due to fear of contracting COVID-19?
Exactly. Here's what I've been telling employers. Let's communicate with those employees about what we're doing to keep them safe. In many instances, they're reading things online, or they're going on the news and they're reading a lot of information that's frightening them. Some of it political, some of it not, some of it real science and some of it not. And so what I've told employers is let's make sure we have a good communication with those employees, explain to them all the things we're going to do to keep them safe. We're going to be having hand sanitizers. We're going to be doing social distancing. We're going to be having masks. We're going to be having gloves to the extent that you can. And what I found is that 95% plus of the employees, once this explained to them, then they feel more comfortable coming back. We did that in our own firm, April. We've got 30 offices around the country. And so we sent everybody home. And then we had to start bringing them back. And we had some fear that was going on. So we developed a plan. We put a team together and we developed a plan for having them return. And it's gone very smoothly, by the way.
Well, that's great to hear. What kind of best practices would you say? When we're reading over the materials that have been made available, about this, I think one of the things that is maybe a hindrance to small business is a lot of the plans really are designed for your larger manufacturers and for corporate offices who have 30 or 50 or 100 people in them. So what is your advice to the small business owner who has, 3 to 10 employees who have, their own dedicated workspace? What are you advising in terms of a best practice for them to adopt?
Sure. I still like to have something in writing. And here's what I suggest is a checklist on what we're going to do. Are we going to take temperatures, for instance? And if we are, how are we going to do that? what sort of hand sanitizer are we going to have? We're going to have them on everybody's desk. Are we going to have people wear masks when they come into the common areas? And are we going to be able to do social distancing? Do we need to separate them a little bit further, make sure they're 6 feet apart? Do we need to put up some petitions maybe between them? That can be done in small offices as well as larger offices. Now, I'm a realist. There's sometimes you can't do that.
Right.
And so what I'm telling my employers is this: if you can't do that and it's not feasible to continue working from home, then what you can do is the best you can. And what is that? We can wear our masks when we're getting closer to people. We can make sure that we're wearing gloves if necessary and feasible. We can also use a lot of hand sanitizer and make sure as we're going throughout the day that we try to social distance to the extent that we can. There is not a system out there that's perfect, but given what we know, what the science of this is, as much as we know right now, that seems to be the best measures, and they're doable. We're doing them in our own office.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a reminder to anybody who might be watching this either live or streaming later, we have made the required hand hygiene signs available at no charge that can be downloaded from our website, which is robbinsregion.com. You click on Robin Strong and go to small business resources. And so, just having resources available, I know we have a number of sources in our community as well as throughout our state for PPE. So, Jeff, I do think we are now seeing, businesses in a much better position to go back to work, because in the early days you couldn't find gloves, and finding masks, was a challenge. So I definitely think those are good advice. Anything else that you have in terms of those for like yourself, who may be able to do some of their work remotely or be able to minimize in-person meetings? Is that a good idea? What is your recommendation around in-person meetings when it may or may not be physically necessary?
Well, that's an excellent question. And here's what I'm telling people. Until we have a vaccine, we've still got a risk. So where you can physically separate yourselves, where you can still carry on business, still get the products out, still sell what you need to, still have contact with the necessary customers or with the public, and internally where you can still communicate with each other, then why not do that while you can? Now, again, you may find that there's an uptick in your business, and therefore you need to get them back, and you need to get them back quickly. Or you may be having a downtrend right now, and it's not necessary to bring them back. So what I've told people is, if you can do things where there's the social distancing and you can still communicate well with each other, you may want to hold off bringing them back until necessary. Now, folks, let me say this to you. That may not work for some of these businesses. Some of these businesses are saying, Jeff, I can't do that. And I completely understand it. And where you can't, you need to get the employees back to work, put the systems in place to keep them as safe as possible, and then move on with your business.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Jeff, one of the things that, we're hearing a little bit about, and I would love for you to chime in on, is around the area of unemployment and those that may have been furloughed or laid off temporarily. I never thought I'd be in a day and age where it was, seen as advantageous to not work or to stay home. But, obviously with the government subsidy, that is an option that people are exercising right now. What is the role of the employer, and what rights do they have if they have employees who are choosing to stay home as opposed to return to work as soon as their job is available?
Well, that's an excellent question. So let me go through a couple of things. First of all, you can have an employee that may be working part of the time, but there's been a reduction in their hours. Mm-hmm. And as a result of a reduction in their hours, they may be eligible for partial unemployment. If that's occurring, then the state said that the employer is the one who needs to file the unemployment for them. Now, the good news about that is, if you do that, if they get a reduction in hours as a result of COVID, so that you're applying for partial unemployment, if they receive the unemployment, then it won't be counted against your account. And that's the good news. Now, there is this subsidy, April, as you mentioned, that quite frankly is making it much more lucrative for some of them to stay home than it is to work. But let's say you say, well, Jeff, we're ready to come back to work. We're ready to put them, we've got a job available for them, but we're having trouble to get them to return. Mm-hmm. What I'm suggesting is this: first, contact them, have a discussion with them, let them know that you're ready for them to come back, you've got a job available for them. If they give you some hesitation, if they don't want to return, I would put it in writing to them that you have a job available, and they should be returning on such and such date at such and such time, and here's what the job is. If they fail to do that and try to continue to collect unemployment or file for unemployment, then folks, I would challenge it. And I've got a lot of my clients that are doing that, because it quite frankly, it's been hard to get some of them back to work because it was lucrative for them to stay home and collect a large sum. So that's what I'm suggesting that be done. And if I've been on the phone this morning, I've had at least 4 or 5 clients. They've asked me that very question, and we're putting together that game plan to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, if there's any advice, that you can give, it is go to work. I mean, it's
exactly right.
Able and not, vulnerable and all of those things, without getting into, giving unsolicited advice. It takes all of us in order to make, business happen and, to enhance our livelihoods. And so I think if there's anything, not anything that would not preclude you from going to work, I think we would certainly, make that plea on behalf of our employers. And not so ironically, we have Candace Edwards, who's watching live from the Department of Labor. So Candace, thanks for tuning in. So, we talk about, those that can go back to work, but what about those employees who don't want to return back to work or are unable because of a medical condition that would make them vulnerable to COVID-19? What should employers do in that instance?
Sure. Well, let's take 2 situations. Let's take the first situation where the employee does not have an ailment or an illness, but they've got an elderly family member that's living with them, or they've got a child who may have some vulnerability. And so they're conveying to you that they're hesitant to be coming back to work as a result. What I have found is if we'll communicate with that employee all of the things that we're going to do to help safeguard them, that generally does the trick and they're able to return. If they still refuse to return, even after we've offered them a position, certainly they can file for unemployment, but we're offering them a job and one that's available. And actually, from a purely legal standpoint, if they're not returning to work simply because of fear that one of their family members who may be vulnerable might get it, that's quite frankly not a legal reason to be staying home. And so what I've explained to people is that there's not a federal or state law that gives them protection from staying home. Now, let me give another situation. Let's say they themselves have a vulnerability. They've got some sort of medical condition. For those of you who have at least 15 employees, there's a federal law called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it says that if you have an employee that has a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a very broad statute, you may have to accommodate that individual. Now, how could you accommodate a person who doesn't want to return because they've got some vulnerability and it's legitimate? It's a legitimate vulnerability. How would you do that? Well, can they work from home? Can they work remotely? Can you stagger their shift to prevent them from having access to so many employees? Are there some things that you can have them do so that they can perform the job? But one option might be to extend their leave even beyond what you're extending with others. And that is one of the ways to accommodate. And we're having to do that with some employees who have these vulnerabilities.
Yeah, very good. And those are the vulnerabilities that were outlined by the CDC and the Department of Public Health and the governor's office. Jeff, is there any kind of documentation required for those? I know, when you get into HIPAA and all these other requirements when you start talking about people's medical records. So is there anything that employers should or maybe should not ask for when an employee presents that they have a medical condition that would make them susceptible?
Yes. Well, as an employer does have a right to ask for the medical information establishing that they do in fact have this disability and that they do in fact need to be accommodated. So we can require them to do that. The employee would then need to go to their doctor would need to get a note from the doctor explaining what was going on and what would prevent them from coming to work, and to determine if there's any way that they can be accommodated. And that's one of the best ways to do it. Whenever I have someone who comes forward with a disability that may be having a problem, the first thing I tell the employer to do is engage in something called the interactive process. That is, sit down with the employee and say, and ask this: what can I do for you? How can I help you so that you can come back to work? April, I will tell you, I've been doing this a long time, and it's been my experience that 90% plus of the people, when you sit down and work with them, you can work a way out for them to be able to come back to work, be productive for your organization. Now, there's a small percentage you can't, and those are the ones that I generally get the calls about, is how do we deal with that? But that's normally what I suggest you do. An employer does have a right to do that. It would be HIPAA protected, but for the fact that the employee is giving the doctor permission to share this information, and the employee is actually bringing it to the employer for the employer to examine to determine, can I accommodate?
Very good. Well, for those of you who just joined us, this is Robbins Live, brought to you today by Langford Allergy. My guest is Jeff Thompson with Constangy, Brooks, Smith, and Prophete LLC. So you brought up accommodations, Jeff. So let's talk about remote working for a second. So, we're hearing from many of our members and businesses in the community that they're adjusting their work from home policies because they were able to maintain productivity and communication, during this trial by fire. Others can't wait to get everybody back in the office, or in many cases need them physically in the office in order to perform the duties of the job. So what considerations should be made for those that decide work from home is an option they want to offer or even require in the future? Okay.
Well, interestingly, I had a client of mine recently that was part of a call center, and they found out that actually their productivity went up 10% when they sent the employees home and had them work remotely. And so they were going to institute a continual plan for working remotely. So here's what I tell employers. First of all, you're not legally required to have them work remotely. In most jobs, you can get them to come back to work. But if you can have them work remotely, and it works and it is productive, and you're taking care of your customers and you're getting the productivity out, it is something you may want to consider. I can tell you in our firm, we've allowed employees to come back, but for those either who had vulnerabilities or who had set up shop at home and are working in a productive manner, we're letting them stay home and work. And now once a vaccine comes in, then obviously we would want to rethink that. Also, there's a lot to be said about interaction. So I realize working remotely can have a lot of benefits, but again, in order to get to know each other, in order to have a cohesive working environment, it sometimes helps to be together. And so I don't want us to bypass that. And I've got some employers that are probably sitting there saying, that's exactly what I needed.
Yeah, I totally get it. And that's one of the things, I'm very grateful in the work that we do. We were able to pivot. Of course, we couldn't have in-person meetings like we normally do and the large events that we host periodically, but from a communication standpoint and, being connected as a staff and being able to communicate with our members, a lot of that work really was conducive to remote working. But, being back in the office now and the opportunity to have face-to-face meetings with our staff, of course, all with proper protocol in place.
Right.
Those brainstorming and collaborative efforts really require you to be in the room and to be able to bounce ideas off of one another. I don't know how many Zoom calls I've been on that, 4 or 5 people are trying to talk at once. So there are certain things that are, much more conducive to an in-person environment. So we're going to talk a little bit more about working from home in just a second, but I want to remind those watching, and we've got quite a few of you today, make sure you drop your questions in the comments, and we'll be taking comments from our audience a little later in the program. But sticking on the line of working from home, we're in a highly connected business, and I know you are as well. So it's very easy to tell when someone's working or not working. But for many, they wonder, how do employers determine the hours worked by employees when they are working remotely?
Exactly. And here's what I've told my clients. You need to have some system in place for accurately recording hours. That can be electronically. You can set up a system so that they type in and enter into their day. You can have them fill out paper timesheets and have them forward that in. You can have them scan it. The Wage and Hour Division of the Department of Labor is the federal entity that oversees these. And what they say is, we don't care what you do as long as it's accurate. And so what I tell people is, the computer-based world is a wonderful thing in many ways. In many ways, it's a pain. But here, you can have them accurately record it electronically, send it in, and keep an accurate reflection of their hours. Now, one of the fears is, well, Jeff, they may be working more hours than what I know. So that's all in the training. You take them through a training process. You document what you did. You explain to them that you're expected to work from these hours to these hours, or you're expected to work no more than 8 hours a day. If you have to work overtime, you need to get permission from your supervisor to do so. Those are the kind of things that you want to put into place to make sure that people are being paid properly, productivity is getting accomplished, and at the same time, you're complying with the law.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about those that have been working remotely, when should employers or what guidance should employers follow to bring their employees back into the physical workspace? Well, their timeline there.
Right. Here's what I think is the best thing to do is to provide them with a timeline. Is to say that and I was working with a client earlier today. They're going to send out a memo to everybody. They're going to have a town hall, a virtual town hall, and they're going to send out a memo following that. The town hall is going to explain the state of the company, where we stand, the fact that we are going to start reincorporating people back in the workplace. We're going to briefly go over what that looks like. Then we're going to have an outline to send to them. And by the way, folks, this works whether you've got 3 or 300. An outline of when they should return. And we'll have our managers, and you'll have the number for you to call your manager if you have any questions. That's what I have found works the best. That way, we're all on the same page. We've communicated what our expectations are. The employees are much more comfortable with that. And then if they have what I call one-offs, where you've got an employee that says, look, I've got a particular issue, I've got a medical problem, or I've got a child care issue, then you can cover that with a manager. And what I'm suggesting, if you've got 50 or more employees, you want to have somebody who is a central source because you don't want different managers giving different answers. Now, for those of you who are 5, 6, 7 employees, you've got someone who runs the business, and I'm sure that's probably who you would go to. But that's what I would do. And we found that if you follow that process and follow through and communicate that, and then follow up in writing, don't just communicate in some virtual town hall, because folks, people are not necessarily listening to you. So I want you to follow up with something in writing so that we all understand we're on the same page.
Oh, Jeff, you're just busting my bubble. I think they're listening to everything I say.
Right. I had a manager ask me, he tell me one time out of frustration, he said, look, I held a meeting and I told them exactly what they needed to do. And my comment was they weren't listening to you.
Yeah, absolutely. This won't be achieved in a Facebook Live or a video message, anything like that. So make sure you're getting those important things in writing. And there are some great tools and resources available to get folks started on those. I know the Georgia Department of Economic Development, and even tools that you guys have sent out. Is there anything on your website you want to point people to so they can find resources that might at least get them started on some of this, Jeff?
Exactly. We've got an entire page on our website. It's www.constangy.com, and you'll probably be sending this out to them. But it's www.constangy.com, CONSTANGY.com. We got a whole web page. It covers every bit of this and then some. Frequently asked questions. It has an entire booklet on how to reopen your business. And here's all the different steps that you want to take in doing so. So we've got that covered. And by the way, this will cover small as well as large employers. We've got anywhere from 5 employee organizations to 50,000, 60,000 and more companies we represent. So we tried to cover it with everybody.
Very good. And so for those of you watching who want some free resources to help you get started on your policies as you return to work and best practices, you can visit the website listed at the bottom of your screen where those tools are made available. I'm talking to Jeff Thompson today. He's our guest, and this segment is sponsored by Langford Allergy. In just a few minutes, we're going to pause for a word from them, but we're going to stick around for some questions from the audience and some more personal questions from Jeff about his experience during COVID-19. So Jeff, let's take another question or two before we pause for our sponsor break. You get back to the office. I know we mentioned PPE and the different protocols that need to be in place. Can employers require employees to wear a mask while at work? And can you give us some different examples and scenarios there?
Sure. Well, the answer is yes, you can. Here's what you want to do. First of all, you want to make sure you have a mask available for them. That's the first thing. And as you know, that we had a problem getting those initially. So you want to have those available. You can have them wear masks. You can take their temperatures. And the way we have done that in our own office is you can take your temperature yourself, and then you type in what that is. We have a web page for you to go to, and you type that in, and it's confidential. Or when you get here, if you don't have something to weigh your temperature, then we've actually got a temperature gun itself that you use, and then you submit that information. Obviously, if you have a fever, then you would not step back into the office. And so you can certainly do that. You can require temperatures. You can also require masks. With regard to temperatures, what I've told people is that you need to keep that confidential. So if you'll have a single source that would be receiving that information. If you're doing it electronically, make sure that the person holding that information, it is password protected.
Very good. And Jeff, let me ask you this: for some of our smaller offices, especially those, who maybe don't interact with the public, would having the employees take their temperature, even at home in the mornings and just reporting if they have a fever or not, would that be seen as an acceptable measure in your eyes?
Yes. And quite frankly, that's what I would do, particularly with my smaller employers. Look, folks, we got to be able to trust our workers. And so that's a good way to do it. And they don't want to infect somebody if they're sick as well. So that's the way to do it. Have a protocol. Check your temperature in the morning, but folks, have a backup plan, because this is not in the forefront of the people's minds when they're trying to get out the door in the morning, so they may forget it. So let's have a backup plan so that we either have somebody there to take their temperature or they are able to do it themselves. By the way, if we have somebody there to take their temperature, obviously they're going to be wanting to wear a mask and wear a glove before they approach an employee, because they've got to get within 6 inches of their forehead in order to do this.
Right. Absolutely. But I do think, for those smaller businesses, which a large percentage of our members and likely businesses watching, really fall into that category. It also alleviates you from having to maintain that data with their temperature each day. And so, really a path of least resistance that also is probably a little more comfortable for all those involved, as long as you've got those trust factors in place and a backup as well.
Absolutely. And particularly with my smaller ones, April, you're right on. Explain to them what you want them to do, have them take their temperature. If they've got a temperature, then obviously call you. Now, what the CDC says is if it's anything higher than 100.4, then you should not come to work. That's up to you guys as to what you do, but that's what the CDC says.
Very good. Well, there's really smart people at the CDC. So I think we all, heed their advice. So we're going to take just a quick break to hear from a word from our sponsor, Langford Allergy, and we'll be back with a few more questions with Jeff and some of your audience questions. Stay with us.
Wheezing, itching, runny nose, and coughing. All these symptoms can be caused by allergies, which are very common in Middle Georgia. Airborne allergens can make it difficult to enjoy life around here, like tailgating or attending a ball game. Even that seasonal cold might be due to allergies. Give us a chance to fix that. It's what we do. With multiple locations in and around Macon, we help children and adults with allergies and asthma. We want to be your Middle Georgia allergy team.
We're back with Robbins Live. For those of you just joining us, my guest today is Jeff Thompson, a partner at Constangy Brooks Smith Prophete LLC. And our sponsor today, who you just heard from, is Langford Allergy. And we want to thank them for being a part and helping us deliver this really important message today. So I think we've covered the small employers on this. I know when we scale up to some of our larger employers, our manufacturers, if they're taking temperatures on site, potentially there's a line building up and they've got people waiting to get into the job site. Do employers have to pay employees while they're waiting to have their temperature taken? It seems like a no-brainer, but I think there might be some confusion around that.
Well, there is, and the answer is yes. If they're having to stand in line in order to get into the place, they're already working when they're doing that. And so what I've told people is this: look, if they're walking straight in, you're hitting them with the temperature gun, and they're walking straight through. It took them every bit of 0.1 second. You don't have to worry about that. A wage and hour division would say that something like that is de minimis. But for my larger employers, where they're having to stand in line, where there's just not enough people taking temperatures, just keep in mind you will need to pay them for that. And so you need to factor that in and understand that if you're having them work their normal 8-hour shift, plus that you've got overtime that's going to add up at the end of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, say you have an employee who thinks they have COVID. Obviously the advice and what the CDC has stated and what every business I know is implementing is don't come to work. But in terms of their return to work, incubation period, quarantine time, what is the role of the employer during all of that?
Sure. Well, the first thing is obvious, and you said this, April, we're going to either send the employee home who has the symptoms or make the employee stay at home who has the symptoms. That's the first thing. If they have symptoms but haven't been checked yet, obviously we would want them to get tested and find the test results before they return. For those employees who are there, who they've had contact with, so let's say they're working out on an assembly line and one of the employees contracts it, and they're working in a department. What we're generally recommending, and the CDC does as well, is obviously send the employee home who has the fever and whatever the other concerns that they have from health-wise. For those employees who are still there, you've got a choice. You either send all of them home that worked in that area. And initially, when this thing first came out, that's what people were doing. The problem with that is they found, wait a minute, if we start doing that and people start contracting, we literally could end up shutting our business down. So Jeff, is there an alternative? And here's the alternative, is obviously the person that either had the symptoms and is sitting at home, or maybe even contracted it. Maybe even they've tested positive. What do you do with the others? What you can do with the others is monitor them. Is you explain to them that we've had an employee that tested positive. By the way, you don't tell them who the employee is. They're going to know, folks, and I realize that, but the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission came out and said that you can explain that there has been a person who tested positive, but you shouldn't tell them who it is. So follow the rule. Don't tell them who it is, but tell them you have had an employee, and ask them that they monitor closely their temperature as well as any other of the symptoms. And I would outline what those symptoms are. As a matter of fact, what I would do would be to hand them a sheet explaining what the symptoms are for them to take home with them.
Great advice. So we actually have a question from the audience that we'll go ahead and ask. So what kind of liabilities should businesses be aware of as they reopen? So we kind of hit on the employee front, but what other things and legal considerations should businesses be considering right now?
Right. That's an excellent question. There's several things that are going right now. And I hate to say it, but we've got lawyers that are lining up ready to file claims and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, if you have an employee that contracts it, if they were able to prove that they got it at your facility, in my mind, quite frankly, that's a tall mountain to climb. But let's say that circumstances were so severe that they were able to establish it. It would be a workers' comp claim. Mm-hmm. For whatever damages, if they had physical ailments as a result. Now, I will tell you, every employer is going to challenge such a claim that an employee files, because how are you going to prove you got it there? at your workplace.
Right.
Even if it turned out that somebody you were working with had it, that doesn't necessarily mean you didn't get it when you went to the store. So I think that it's going to be a tough thing, but they've got a right to file. Employers can contest it. Secondly, I'm more concerned about the general public or vendors or individuals like that are coming in. So here's what I've told everybody. First of all, you need to check with your carrier. I would be contacting my carrier and say, look, if we have an employee that comes in of another organization, or we have someone from the general public, we have a contractor that comes in, develops that, and lo and behold, they sue our organization. Do we have coverage for this? I would be asking that question. Could someone who is not an employee sue us for negligence or something? And the answer is yes, I think they could. So my best defense to that for employers is this: let's follow the protocols that are recommended by the CDC that are reasonable enough for you to still operate and operate efficiently. Okay. And at the same time, make sure that you've got coverage. And that's probably the best you can do. Now, let me just give you an example. Some of the organizations that are sitting on here may have vendors that come in on a regular basis. Can we limit what they access? Can we limit what door they go in and out of? Can we place some limits? Can we make sure that they're having their temperature checked? Can we make sure that they're wearing masks? Can we make sure that they're wearing the necessary protective gear? Those are the things that we want to have them agree to. Here's another one, and I will tell you this, April, I hadn't litigated it. I mean, this is all brand new.
Yeah.
But if we're going to be contracting with a third party who's going to be coming in and providing work for us on our, let's say, on our property, should we have some sort of indemnification provision that says if your employee sues us for something like this, then you will indemnify us? I think it's something you should consider. So those are some of the things I think you should look at. Also, there's OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. OSHA has basically said this: follow what the CDC says. And they've been putting out guidance related to that, but it's generally tracking what the CDC says. So here's what I would do. I would be on your OSHA website. I would be watching to see what they've done. And by the way, we've got an entire OSHA division. In fact, the head of our OSHA department used to be the head of OSHA. And so he's a good resource. And so we're trying to prepare employers for those types of issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's just so much to consider, I mean, much like anything, you don't always know what you don't know.
That's right.
But in this environment, access to information, the information is there. I think the biggest challenge for businesses is that, the status quo keeps changing, right? And in most instances, that's a good thing because we are seeing, signs of recovery, signs of consumer confidence and people wanting to get back to work. Right. And I think at the end of the day, everybody really just wants to protect themselves in the best and most reasonable way possible. So one of the methodologies that has been, mentioned in the media really since this all started revolves around contact tracing. And I know that the governor and the Department of Public Health have set up systems and a website where you can enter all of that data. What is your advice for businesses in terms of, keeping a log of people who come in and out? Of course, we require certain things of our employees, and there are things we can require of contractors and even of customers as to whether they wear a mask or whether they're required to maintain social distancing. But do you recommend that businesses take it as far as, keeping a log or doing anything in the event of there's contact tracing to happen?
Sure. I think it's a good idea to know who's on your property. And particularly right now, I think it's a good idea not only to know who is on your property, but also make sure that they're following the same safety considerations that you're asking of your workforce. So I think both of those are a good idea. And here, let me step back on the issue of litigation. One of the issues that is always looked at when there's a claim, a negligence claim, let's say filed against an employer, was did the employer act reasonably? Did they take reasonable steps? Well, it certainly seems reasonable to me that if I have a facility, large or small, and I have people coming into that facility, that I should have a right and or an obligation to make sure that they're following whatever safety considerations that we've put into place. So if you've put them in place for your employees, I think it certainly makes sense that you would put it in place for anybody else who is visiting. That's going to protect them. That's going to protect your employees. It's also going to help protect your business.
Very good advice. And Jeff, we have a lot of businesses in our community, of course, whether it's retail or other service businesses that have a lot of in-person contact, a lot of things that get touched, and all of that. Can businesses have basically a no mask, no service policy, much like, no shoes, no service?
Well, and the answer is yes. That's the good. You can require certain things of individuals who are going to come on your property, particularly right now, and you're going to find support for that. Now, again, look, I'm a rational human being. You got to do things that will actually work and that allow you to continue to run your business. And I think that the governor and what they've come out with, they've tried to do that. It's that balance that they're trying to establish, which is difficult. I mean, it's in particular when you're operating on information that you hope is correct.
Right.
That's been part of the problem. So I think, to answer your question, yes, I think you need to do that. Take reasonable steps to take that approach. You're not asking too much of people nowadays to do that. I've got several friends of mine that own restaurants, for instance. Well, and I've gone in and visited the restaurants, and they've got tables that are cordoned off that you can't sit in. I mean, and they've got various safety measures in place. They put up guards. They've done various things. We're trying to get back to business as usual. And by the way, folks, this is a plug. Support them.
Yeah.
We need our small businesses need our support right now more than ever.
They absolutely do. And Jeff, I will say, as a personal point of pride in all of this, I think one of the things that has been most encouraging is just how ready and willing our local businesses have been to take the necessary steps. When the governor and the Department of Public Health come out with new guidance, they have, figured out ways to accommodate and to adapt and pivot their business models. And so, I think anything that we can do as community members to support them and to encourage them, when they get that new information, they really are working tirelessly to implement those strategies. And that can't be easy on top of all of the other worries about just being closed for whatever period they may have or any other, lost revenue as a result of COVID-19 in our communities.
I agree. And I've been so impressed with them. We represent a lot of small businesses, and they're very innovative and have worked hard. And so God bless them. I mean, they've certainly gone through a difficult time.
Absolutely. So, and I know, Jeff, that you work with a lot of business owners and leaders in business through all of this. What do you think has really been the biggest personal challenge? At the end of the day, it takes things like a global pandemic to humanize people sometimes. But I think so many of us have dealt with this in different ways. And, that's manifest itself in different activities that we're engaging in now that maybe we weren't before. But what have you seen as kind of the biggest change in the approach of your clients and the businesses to the way that they're looking, to the future of their business going forward?
Right. Well, one of the things is they know they've got to innovate. They got to pivot at least on the short term in order to be able to keep their businesses open. But I tell you, the thing that's been heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time is how these small business owners have treated their employees like family and want to do everything they can to help them and continue to keep their businesses open. And I have just been amazed at the things that some of these small employers have done to make sure that they do that. So I will tell you, it's been a real challenge because they didn't have as much information as they needed to know what to do. For instance, the PPP, when they were trying to borrow money, how do we do it? Under what circumstances can we receive it? Should we give the money back? I mean, all of these things they've been grappling with, and particularly of our small employers that don't have in-house counsel or don't have somebody who's an expert in there. They're having to make decisions on their own. So they've done so well, and I've been so impressed with them. But like everybody else, they've reached a breaking point where we're ready to get back to work and want to work safely. And what I'm saying is get back to work, do it within the safety guidelines that you have set forth to try to protect your employers and try to protect your business, and then let's move ahead.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I know, Jeff, I've said this before, and I think probably on this platform that, that research is showing that those companies that take care of their employees right now are the ones that are really going to fare the best in the long run, not only because they're building on that trust and that loyalty, but also consumers see that. People talk and they have good experiences. They see that. And those are the kind of businesses, that people want to support. If you had a crystal ball and had been able to foresee any of this back in January, is there anything that you think that, as a result of all of this, that businesses, should really put into place now to protect themselves from future disasters like this?
Well, that's a good point. And one of the things I've been telling my clients is, let's do this. Let's do a look back and find and ask ourselves, what did we do well and what did we not do well? Because this could happen again. Pray it doesn't.
Right.
Plan for it. And let's set a system in place so that the next time this comes along, those potholes that we hit along the way, we'll have them covered and we'll be ready. I've got a worksheet, as it were. It's just a document that goes through a lot of this that I'll be glad to provide to you guys to send out, that kind of covers some of this from A to Z. And that's what I'd recommend you do. I'd recommend sitting down. I can tell you, we've done it in our own firm. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? Let's make sure what we got wrong, we fix it, and we be prepared just in case it does roll back around. Yeah,
absolutely. And I couldn't agree more, Jeff. We thought we were in good shape. Prior to this, we had a hurricane plan and a tornado plan and an earthquake plan and an active shooter plan. And none of them seem to cover the challenges that we experienced this go round. So I think, like most businesses, we struggle to kind of find our foothold. But I do think there are some best practices and some wins in all of this that we've discovered, some new strengths identified, and some new technologies that we're utilizing. There's a lot of meetings that I used to attend that I now think are going to be an email or a Zoom call going forward, just when you start to factor in time and travel into them. And of course, there's nothing that replaces that in-person meeting, but I do think there are lessons to be learned as we move into a post-COVID environment. So, Jeff, we're about ready to wrap up. Is there any other topic that we didn't hit on that you feel like we need to cover, or any message you want to just pound the drum on a little bit before we sign off?
Well, no, I think you've asked some good questions. The only thing I was going to say, and I mentioned this before, is support your small businesses. Make it a point to do that. Try to get out there. They're trying their best to keep afloat, as well as service their customers in a safe fashion. And as we get more comfortable, let's get out there and do that. God bless them.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I couldn't have said it better. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today's edition of Robbins Live. And thanks once again to our guest, Jeff Thompson with Constangy Brooks Smith Prophete LLC, and to our sponsor, Langford Allergy. The replay of today's show can be found on the Chamber's Facebook page and our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time.